Hi, my name is Gloria Robert. Today we shall be discussing the topic functioning ecosystem. Now, objectives of lesson. By the end of the lesson, students should be able to 1. Define ecosystem. 2. Mention the two components of ecosystem. 3. Mention the types of biotic components. 4. Mention the types of food relationships and their meanings. 5. Highlight the transformation of energy in nature. And 6. State the two laws of thermodynamics and how they relate to the flow of energy in an ecosystem. So, what is ecosystem? Ecosystem is a community of living things and non-living things interacting with one another. Now, in an ecosystem, we have the living things and the non-living component, right? These interact. When we say interact, it doesn't mean that they talk with one another. It simply means that the living things depends on the non-living things for their life processes. For example, plants and animals are living things. Now, animals take in oxygen and take out carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are non-living things. Now, plants on the other side too depends on sunlight, carbon dioxide, water for the process of photosynthesis. So the carbon dioxide, the water, the sunlight are examples of non-living things. So these all meant by interacting with one another. Now, ecosystem is said to be self-sustaining and functional because the components are linked in a variety of processes. So let's discuss the two components of the ecosystem. Now, the two components of ecosystem are 1. Biotic components, also known as the living components. 2. Abiotic components, also known as the non-living components. Now, our major focus here is on the biotic components. So, the biotic component is grouped into two, namely A. Autotrophs, B. Heterotrophs. A. Autotrophs, B. Heterotrophs. So, what are autotrophs? Autotrophs are plants. Of course, some certain protists and bacteria can also belong into these categories. So, they are plants which are capable of manufacturing their food by themselves. They carry out a kind of autotrophy or autotrophic nutrition. Autotrophy or autotrophic nutrition. They are also known as producers. So producers make use of energy from the sun. They make use of non-living things, carbon dioxide and water, to make their food in a process called photosynthesis. So we can say that autotrophs are plants, or we can call them producers. Now this is an image showing producers. Okay. B is heterotrophs. Now these are animals which are not capable of manufacturing their food by themselves. So they carry out a kind of heterotrophy or heterotrophic nutrition. They feed on food. So heterotrophs are generally called consumers and decomposers. So we have two categories of heterotrophs. Now let's start with looking at the meaning of consumers. Now what are consumers? Consumers are animals, don't forget. So consumers are divided into three categories, which are 1. Herbivores or the herbivorous animals. These are animals that feed on plants only. Examples are elephants, goats, cattle, grasscutter, antelope, grasshopper, zebra, sheep, and so many more. Right now, they are also called the primary consumers in the food chain of feeding relationship. So, the second category here is the carnivores. The carnivores are also called the carnivorous animals. These are animals that feed on flesh or meat. Examples are dogs, tiger, cheetah, lion, and so many out there. So, in the feeding relationship, we call them the secondary consumers. And the last one here is omnivores. Omnivores are also known as the omnivorous animals. The animals that can feed on both plants and flesh. Examples of omnivores. Yes, human being. You're an example of omnivores. So man, pigs, birds, these are examples of omnivores. And in the feeding relationship, we call them the tertiary consumers. So don't forget that consumers are grouped into three. We have the herbivores, the carnivores, and the omnivores. So these are images representing each of these type of consumers. The zebra is a herbivore, the lion is a carnivore, the bear is an example of omnivore. All right, let's talk about the decomposers. Now, decomposers are saprophytic organisms that feed on dead matters of plants and animals. They break them down, that means they decompose them, and in the process, they release nutrients into the soil. Now, this nutrient is used by plants for photosynthesis and to also maintain their own body processes. Now, examples of decomposers, we have fungi, we have bacteria, we have earthworm. Let me go further here by telling you that we have two categories of decomposers. We have the micro decomposers, that means MICRO. That means the tiny ones that you cannot see except you look at them through a microscope. So fungi and bacteria are examples of micro decomposers. Now the second category, we call them macro decomposers, the MACRO. Okay, MACRO. These are large decomposers, so you don't need a microscope before you can see them. So the earthworm is an example of macro decomposers. Now, what do we mean when we say decompose or break down? So let's look at the meaning of decomposition. Decomposition is the breakdown of organic matters in dead plants and animals, right? So when plants and animals, when they die, they get broken down into simpler substances. Okay, now this is what we call decomposition. Now this occurs when the saprophytes such as bacteria and fungi, okay, feed on dead decaying matter of plants and animals. So carbon dioxide and water are also released during the process, thus helping in the recycling of nutrients. When decomposition is done, what happens? Nutrients such as carbon dioxide and water is released or are released into the environment. So the process also refers to as decay or putrefaction. So if you don't want to say decomposition or decompose, you can as well call it decay or putrefaction. So here are images showing the different categories of decomposers. Just take your time and study the images. So let's talk about feeding relationships. Now, what is feeding relationships? Now, this is a food pathway that shows how organisms get food or nutrient and energy from each other in their environment. Now, we have different kinds of feeding relationships. So we'll be discussing them one after the other. The first one we are going to look at is what we call the food chain. Now, the food chain is a linear feeding relationship that shows the transfer of energy from one organism to the next. So it's a straight kind of feeding relationship. And so we have examples of food chains here. The first one here, we have grasses, which can be eaten by the antelope which can be eaten by the lion can be eaten by the decomposer. That is when they die, of course. Now don't forget, the arrows here represent the fact that the second organism can feed on the first one. So when you're drawing a food chain, the arrow is compulsory for you to have your food mark. Now the second example of a food chain, we have the diatom. Now this can be eaten by the mosquito larvae. Now the mosquito larvae can be eaten by the tilapia fish, and the tilapia fish can be eaten by the whale. Now the grasses here and the diatom are known as the producers. The antelope and the mosquito larvae, we call them the primary consumers. The lion and the tilapia fish here represent the secondary consumers. Now, depending on your food chain, when you see on fungi, bacteria, or earthworm, then you know that here we have the decomposers. Now, any other organism there can be a tertiary consumers. However, note this: every food chain starts with a producer. So every food chain starts with a plant, right? Now, the source of all energy in a food chain is from the sun. So we call it solar energy. Now, the arrow in a food chain shows the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the other. It's showing that energy is moving from one organism to the other. Now, the second type of feeding relationship here is the food web. This is an interrelated or complex feeding relationship that shows the transfer of energy from one organism to the next. Now, a food web shows all possible pathway by which organism can get food or energy. Now, in a food web, organisms have alternate sources of food that they can feed on. All right, so in the food web we have different alternate organisms that can be eaten by an organism. Yeah, now if you look at the grasses in the first image, now it can be eaten by the grasshopper, it can be eaten by rabbits, right? Now the rabbit also have other food. If it doesn't want to eat the grass, it can eat carrots. Now the birds here can feed on grasshopper Other option, it can feed on grains, right? So food web shows the alternate food that organism can feed on, unlike food chain. Now the second image too, we have grasses. The grasses can be eaten by rabbits. The rabbits can be eaten by the fox. Also, the grass can also be eaten by insects such as grasshopper. It can also be eaten by slug. So the vole can eat the insect. Apart from that, the thrush can also eat the insect. The frog can eat it. So it shows alternate food that can be eaten by organism. However, take note of this: every food web starts with a producers. Don't forget another name for producers: autotrophs. Yes, plant. Very good. Now it consists of several food chains. So if you look at the second image here, we can pick out food chains. So I'm starting with one: grass to insect to the vole to the hawk. One food chain. Another one: grass to the slug to the thrush to the hawk. Okay, that is another food chain. Another food chain: grass, insect. So the left you have frog, fox. Another food chain: grass, insect, vole. To the left you have fox. Now grass, rabbit, fox. So there are several food chains in a food web. Just take your time and study the food web. You can pick out the food chain. Just trace the line, trace the arrows. Okay, now we have differences between food chain and food web. Now food chain on the side, food web on the other side. Number one, a food chain, it's a simple linear feeding relationship. Unlike food web, it's a complex interlinked feeding relationship. Number two, on the food chain, it has fewer trophic levels. Food web, it has many trophic levels. Now number three, it has only one pathway of food chain. Then on the food web, it has several pathways of food chains. Number four, no alternate food to feed on by the organisms in such feeding relationship. Under food web, alternate food to feed on present. Then number five, organisms have lesser chances of survival on the food chain, but in food web, organisms they have greater chances of survival because they have alternate food they can feed on. If they can't feed on A, they feed on B. If they can't feed on B, they'll feed on C, and so on. But for food chain, if the A is not there, no food to feed on. So that is why in food web there is greater chances of survival. All right, let's move to the next part. So let's look at trophic level. What do we mean by trophic level? This is the feeding level or stage occupied by an organism in a food chain or a food web. Okay, also it is the number of links by which energy is transferred from one organism to another. Simply put, every organism in a food chain or a food web is a trophic level. So if you look at this example of a food chain, we have four trophic level. The first trophic level there is the maize. The second trophic level there is the locust. The third trophic level is the lizard, and the fourth one is the snake. All right. So in the food chain above, each of the organism represents a trophic level. So we can say it has four trophic levels. Now our classwork here. The first food chain here, we have how many trophic level? Just count the organism: corn, rat, owl. That means three. The second one, we have how many trophic level? Four. Good. And the last one, how many trophic level do we have? Five. Good. So pyramids. We shall be discussing pyramids. Now we have three kinds of pyramids in functioning ecosystem. All right, the first one is the pyramid of number. Now a pyramid of number shows how many organisms are found at each trophic level of a food chain. Now normally the producers are usually much more in number as it goes up the pyramid. Okay, now the number of organisms decreases progressively from the first, which is usually the producer, to the last. So the primary consumer is going to much more many, okay, than the primary consumers, which is also going to be many or more than the secondary consumers, and of course going to be more than the tertiary consumer. So let's give them number. The primary consumer, we can have 1,000. The the primary producers, we can have 1,000. The primary consumers, let's say we have 800. The secondary consumers, we can have like 400. The tertiary consumer, we can have 100. So you can see that there's a decrease in the numbers as it goes on in the pyramid. Now here, the number of organisms in each level decreases, but not the size of the organisms involved. So the size can increase, all right, but the number decreases. Take note. So the second pyramid we are going to be looking at is the pyramid of energy. Okay, a pyramid of energy shows the amount of energy stored in organisms at each trophic level or a food chain. Okay, of a food chain. Now the amount of energy decreases progressively from the first organism or the producer to the last organism. Now the producers are going to have more energy, okay, compared to the primary consumers, compared to the secondary consumers and the tertiary consumer. So let's study this image here. Now the primary consumer, the producers here, we have 1000 amount of energy. Now the primary consumers, we have 100. The secondary, we have 10. And the tertiary, we have 1. You can see a decrease in the amount of energy as it goes up the pyramid. Okay, the last type of pyramid is pyramid of biomass. Now, a pyramid of biomass shows the dry mass or the weight of all individual organisms in each trophic level of a food chain. So when we say dry mass, we mean weight. We're talking about the weight of an organism when water has been removed. Okay, so the dry mass also decreases progressively from the first organism, which are the producers, to the last organism. Now let's take the second image as our case study. Here we can see that the weight of the organisms, the producers, is 585, which decreases to 77 in the primary consumers. By the time you weight them in the secondary consumers, we have 12, and by the time it gets to tertiary consumer, is 1.1. So this shows a decrease in the weight or dry mass of organism as it goes up the pyramid. So take your time and study the pyramids. So let's talk about energy transformation in nature. Energy transformation in nature. We are going to be looking at energy flow. Now, energy exists in various forms in nature, all right? We can have chemical energy, we can have solar energy, we can have nuclear energy, mechanical energy, electrical energy, and so many. However, in this topic or in this subject, we are going to be looking at two major forms of energy: the solar energy or the sun energy, and the chemical energy. Now, energy can either be used to do work by an organism or it can be stored in the body of an organism. Energy flow is unidirectional. It flows through just one path, all right, or one channel. Now, the solar energy from the sun can be converted by producers into chemical energies. That means when organisms like the primary consumers feed on the producers, what they get is what? Food, and that food becomes chemical energy in their body. So also you as a person, when you eat food, it becomes chemical energy in your body. This chemical energy can also be converted to another form of energy like kinetic energy. So the solar energy from the sun can be converted by producers into chemical energy when they are eaten by animals. So for energy to be passed on, food must be consumed. So no food, no energy. However, not all energy in organisms flow from one level into the next trophic level. Only the energy used to make new cells remain with the organisms, and these are the only kind of energy that can be passed on. Alright, reasons for this is that some of this energy does not get consumed. Okay, for example, few organisms eat an entire organism, including the roots of plants or bones of animals. Now, when cattle feed on grasses, they don't eat everything. They don't eat the roots. They might just take some part of the leaves and leave the rest. So those parts that are not eating, they contain energy. Now this energy are left behind. Also, when animals lion, when they feed on goat, antelope, they don't eat everything. Sometimes they leave the bones. The bones and some part that are left over also contain energy. So that is why when we say that not all the energy in every trophic level is consumed. This is what we meant by that. Now, majority of the energy an organism receives get lost as heat. Okay, imagine you are urinating. Sometimes if the urine touches your skin, is it hot? Yes, you are losing energy, and that energy is in the form of heat energy. So we can lose energy through transpiration, that is for plants, excretion for animals, sweating animals, respiration in both plants and animals. You can use energy for movement. So during movement, energy too can be lost. Energy is used to maintain constant body temperature. Now, undigested food, okay, the waste from undigested food, like feces too, can also serve as a means through which energy can be lost into the environment. Now, this inefficient loss of energy at each trophic level explain why food chain are really more than 5 organisms long. If you notice the food chain we've studied so far, I think the longest is 5 organisms, because at each trophic level, energy is lost. Now, the producer consumes some energy. Now, the primary consumers are feeding on the producer, some energy is lost in the process. Now, when the secondary consumer feed on the primary consumer, some amount of energy is lost again. Then the tertiary feed on another energy is lost. And when the decomposer feed again on the tertiary consumers, some energy is lost. At the end, you find out that if the food chain is too long, energy might not even get to maybe the seventh organism or trophic level. So that is why most time the food trophic level are not usually more than 5 organisms long. Now, the transformation of energy in nature is explained with the principle of the law of thermodynamics. So we're going to study the law of thermodynamics. Now, laws of thermodynamics. First law of thermodynamics states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can be converted from one form to another. We've just discussed that. Now, the solar energy in plants is converted to chemical energy when we eat food. Now, this chemical energy can be converted to kinetic energy to help us to move from one place to another or do other works. Now, the second law of thermodynamics states that during the transformation of energy from one form to another, some energy is lost. So, transformation of energy is not 100% efficient. The meaning is that as energy is moving from one trophic level to another, some of this energy are lost into the environment as heat. Now, these laws are applicable in the ecosystem as they explain what happened to the energy in food that is consumed. Oh, nice one there. So at this time we have our student activities. So I want you to just sit back, relax, attempt these questions. If you have any difficulty answering anyone, go back to the video, listen to it once again, and I believe you'll be able to answer them. So take your time, go through the questions. Yeah, this is the answer to the student activities. We have the multiple choice part. These are the answers. Why the theory part? You need to go back to the video, listen to it once again if you are not able to answer any of this. So I want to encourage you, subscribe to my YouTube channel, view my videos, download as many times as you can. I want also believe that this teaching is actually helping you. So you can drop a comment for me on my YouTube. So at this moment, I want to say thank you for joining me in this class. Thank you for learning. Have a wonderful time.